Welcome to Taxed and Confused, the podcast where tax administration meets real talk. We are your hosts, Lizzie and Lisa, two tax nerds on a mission to decode the rules, demystify the system, and maybe even make you laugh along the way. From tax returns to objections and everything in between, we're diving into the world where the burden of proof is on you, not the ATO. That's right, this isn't criminal law. In tax, you're guilty until proven compliant. But just a quick heads up, this podcast is for educational purposes only. It's not tax advice, and it's definitely not a substitute for professional guidance tailored to your situation. So brace for bureaucracy and join us as we explore the weird, the wonky, and the wildly important world of tax admin, because when it comes to tax, we're all a little taxed and confused. So, Lisa, we break down in today's episode the TPB's draft AI guidance to make sense of how AI use intersects with professional judgment, ethics, and the code of professional conduct. Are you ready for this?
Love it. It's a good topic, Lizzie, because we've all dabbled, haven't we?
Certainly.
And I think we've all dabbled for probably good and evil, but hopefully more good than evil. And we need to know where we dabble, don't we?
Certainly
I just love it how
do.
they say AI is going to get rid of us all. And I'm going, it hasn't happened yet, you know?
Yeah.
They've been saying that about accountants. Yeah. I always think AI just gets rid of the mundane stuff. I just always say that, but no, it's really, really interesting, and I think we see it from a number of different angles, don't we, as well? Because we see it from our students,
Yeah.
but we also see
certainly.
it from other practitioners, and we
Yeah.
see it from other academics, and we see different things.
And industry and all
yeah,
the trouble
exactly.
that people can get in those court cases where hallucinations pop up, reports where things haven't been checked off. And yeah, students who've perhaps used it and maybe suffer the consequences of using it in the sense that it doesn't really provide the answer that they were truly needing. So
Exactly, and the
the
big
good
four
and the
firms
bad.
as well, right? The big four firms are doing it as well. So big four
Yeah.
firms have got, there's plenty of cases and things that have gone up to Senate estimates as well with, did they actually check what they submitted? The hallucinations are all there, but whose fault is it? Is it the person that did them, or is it the person that didn't check it and said it was okay to go out? So
so it's
there's always
understanding
checks and
the
balances.
tool itself as well as
Exactly.
the protocols, the procedures, the governance around usage that really needs to be considered. So let's take a step back though. Let's set the scene. We're looking at the TPB here and its role. So it's the regulator of tax practitioners. So if tax practitioners are providing tax agent services, they're needing to register with the tax practitioners board, the TPB, and that means that they're obliged to comply with the code of conduct, the determination. It really sets a tone for the level of ethical practice that's going to be provided. It provides a bit of a safety net, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting. It's because we've got the TASA legislation, which is the legislation that we have to be registered to be able to provide tax agent services if we're an accountant, so to speak. Lawyers are going to have their practicing certificates and their legal practicing certificates, which is a bit different. But it enables, or what it does, it enables non-lawyers to be able to provide tax advice, really. And it gives us access to the ATO systems and act on behalf of taxpayers with the ATO. Okay, and know where that scopes for it all. But that's the TASA, that's the actual legislation part of it as I think about it. But we've also then got this codified code of ethics that have come across over the past little bit where, if we think about most tax agents are accountants, which means we're probably a member of a professional body, which means we probably know APES 110 pretty well. But then on top of that, we've now got this codified code of conduct that they've put on tax agents specifically, which, I think we've had a chat about this before, Lizzie, but it's very, very similar to what APES 110 is really, isn't it? It's keeping the same sort of ethical attributes the same way, but it means that we have to do that. So, I always think about it like a politician's defense. It says, it's sort of like, well, it's not illegal what I did, but should you have done it? Does it pass the pub test sort of mentality that we talk about, isn't it?
Yeah, and obviously, if some practitioners, depending on what their accounting associations are, what they're associated with outside of the tax practitioners board, it ensures that everyone who is providing tax agent services at least has that minimum standard of conduct. And the TPB will investigate alleged breaches, apply sanctions, and that could lead to anything from a learning type, a warning type thing to a termination of their registration for a period of time.
And that can
So
happen for a code of conduct breach, isn't it, Lizzie? It's not just the TASA law; it is at the code of conduct breach as well.
Yeah.
And just thought of something when you were saying that, is that a lot of people probably think that every tax agent is a member of one of the three accounting bodies. Well, that's not true. And the data that seems to be coming out of the TPB is only about half of us are.
Yeah, wow.
So therefore, there does need to be that sort of diligence on that ethical part of it, because that's to me, that's more, because you've got to think about the role that you're doing as being a tax agent as well. Think about what we're trying to do. It comes over with the overlay of AML CTF that we're coming into in 1st July as well. It's sort of like, why do we have it? You've got to think about the greater good, because it's all a compliance burden.
Yeah, that's for sure. And so we have this kind of regulatory role of the TPB, the Tax Practitioners Board, but they also are there to help educate and support practitioners. So they do provide a lot of guidance and information on their website that can be really supportive to practitioners, although may not have the legal backing of the legislation itself, to help interpret the obligations and duties that tax practitioners have. So that's what we're looking at today, is one particular example of that, and it's currently in, at the time of recording, draft form, and we're likely to see that pretty promptly become its final version. So why? So we're looking at obviously a draft AI guidance. What is the problem that, or the gap that's being filled here by the Tax Practitioners Board in their guidance?
Well, it's coming down to who's providing the tax advice, isn't it, Lizzie? So if we, and we've talked about it before in our previous papers that we talk about, that we're regulating, the Tax Practitioners Board and TASA regulate a person, not a thing, okay? And we're there to enable the tax laws to be applied appropriately for our client base, being the taxpayer. But if all of a sudden there is a non-human involved, like, what's getting regulated? Does that just slip through to the keeper? And that, you think about that from any sort of accounting software, or what we got involved with the crypto aggregators and things like that. And also with AI now, you put something into AI, are they actually providing tax advice? And anyone can get that, because they're making a judgment. Really, it's not just a Google search, here's a document, read it and understand it yourself. They're bridging that gap. I mean, there's probably a number of listeners that look at, you put something into Google and you don't realize your first few lines is like Copilot. It is an AI engine. And before you get down to your normal Google search type things as well. So the gap to me is very much around person versus thing.
And it's really important to reflect on a contemporary society that is becoming increasingly digitalized, automated. If we have code, if we have generative AI models helping to make things simpler for us in certain ways, or quicker or prompter, the counter of that is that we need to ensure that the rights, the duties, the ethical considerations, the human of that conversation is maintained, to make sure no one's getting left behind, no one's getting bad advice. We obviously are concerned here with even, the influences, the TikTok messaging, the misinformation, what's actually training AI models is all this information, not necessarily good quality or bad quality. It's everything, and it has, depending on its construction, bias in its own right. So we've got to be really mindful and turn our attention to what is actually going on and what is being produced and how that fits in. But it's also about how we engage with those tools, that we've got to be careful, particularly as a practitioner. If you're putting information into a machine, what information are you putting in? And is that in itself a breach of your code of conduct? You're breaching more broadly issues around privacy laws or copyright laws. There's a lot of implications for simply typing a prompt into AI models here, which we've got to be mindful of. So here we've got the TPB issuing some draft guidance to flag, hey, practitioners out there, you have to turn your mind to what's going on. It's actually you who are providing the tax agent services. Even if you use this machine, you are the person here in this conversation. You're providing the service. So you are still ultimately responsible for that. And it steps through a lot of the elements to how it connects to the code and the determination items there.
Yeah, exactly, Lizzie. There's two very much streams, which is what you've said. There's the providing the advice bit, right? And I think we're good with that, but we've also got to think about the privacy and putting things up into whatever search, whatever AI, tool we're using, because that tool, who reads the terms and conditions of that tool? Who do we know who owns it? I mean, we were listening to a webinar, I remember about 6 months ago or something, and someone says, I'm just going to upload the trust deed up into AI. Both of us were texting, I think, at the time, going, what's going on?
Or bank statements.
Oh, all that sort of stuff, right? So it's very interesting, because when I do questions about AI and ethics and do any sort of presentation like that, I sort of ask who uses what. And a lot just use just the common ones that are out there in the greater ecosystem, the Internet of Things, or whatever you want to call it, right? And they're putting information up there, they want specific answers, but you've got to ask generic things, otherwise you're breaking privacy. Like our disclaimer on this is for education purposes only. We're going to, I love embellishing a few things to make the story a bit more juicy. You know that, you tell me not to. But, that's the issue with it all. But then do you actually do something like, we use at different universities or big four firms where it's actually protected and it comes from a specific data set.
Yeah.
So there's a number of things of privacy, confidentiality, and competency, really, if you look at it, that really comes through, which the Tax Practitioners Board is trying to give us guidance on doing it. Because, really, Lizzie, if you're not using AI, I don't think you're being very efficient, really. Let's just put it that way. I use it. I know you use it. I use it. I use it very often. I probably use it every day to some extent. But you've got to know how to use it. It's not going to replace your thinking. It's just going to make you more efficient. I have conversations with a few of my mates who's quite into this as well. And I say, always think of your AI engine as a graduate, right? They know just enough to be dangerous, and they're very pleasing. You know what I mean? So, they're very pleasing. It's and that's what it is. Oh, I remember, when you put up in a residency question or something like that into Chatty GPT, and it gave me like 2 residency tests, and I said, isn't there more than that? Oh yes, there's 3. Oh, and why did you use that case? What about this case? Oh, good idea. They have this conversation with it. So it's there's a number of things that we need to understand how it works, but the big thing is any tools we use, being tax agents, we're responsible for because we are the ones providing the advice.
Yeah, and so if we're responsible for it, we ultimately need to understand the capabilities and limitations of the tools, and really assess and really use professional judgment with what they're spitting out. So the outputs, we really need to carefully judge and assess, and ultimately, and this goes back to perhaps the students or those that have got limited knowledge of tax, it's actually harder to make those assessments if you don't have that grounding in, for example, tax law. If you don't know what the law is, how it makes it harder for you to judge what the outputs are. And at the same time, like you said, it's very pleasing, it's helpful. There's an automation bias inherent in a lot of technology. We often trust it because it spits it out and it looks great. It's convincing. And so we've got to be mindful not to get caught up in that. So it can help us with analyzing, interpreting, providing informational insights. It can, we can design a chatbot for a program. We can, look at a variety of different mechanisms in AI supporting us. But it's a tool. It's not meant to replace the us element here. As you said at the start, it helps make life more efficient. The productivity is assisted. We can perhaps improve the quality of things. But ultimately, it is the tax practitioner that is providing the services, no matter what or who they use. So this extends to offshoring, outsourcing. The same applies. If it's a tool like AI, if it's an outsourced or offshore person, it is ultimately still that tax practitioner that is responsible. And it comes down to, even the supervision issues. So if you're a tax practitioner within a bigger firm, what are those parties, those junior members of that firm doing? And are you aware of how they're using AI in doing their work that then you're reviewing, and what processes and protocols are in place to manage that relationship? That in itself becomes really important. So often what we end up talking about is not the technology elements, but the real normal governance concerns that any practice should really be contemplating. Supervisory relationships. We live in a world where we're on Teams, we're on Zoom, we're on, we're working in all different locations. So we're using technology. So how does that impact supervision more broadly? Throw in the AI as well. It's as part of that package, that digital toolkit that we're going to be adopting, increasingly so, because it works for us. But particularly at the time of the recording, where we've got fuel shortages. There's a benefit of working from home. So that distance creates not necessarily an inability to supervise. It's about working out how we should be supervising that kind of element. So how should we be managing the AI usage? It's not necessarily denying it. It's about selecting a suitable AI tool that meets the needs. So looking at the terms and conditions, is it a in-house versus external? Is it free? That's probably more problematic if you're getting it for free, because if it's free, we all know that our data is really what the product is.
Yeah, that's what you're paying for it. And that's what we're saying, providing a tax agent service for fee or reward, our argument is if you're giving up data, that's fee or reward as far as we're concerned as well. And what you're picking up on is very much around, it's the process and the parameters. Okay, don't get bogged down that you're using AI. It's how you use it. It's only as good as if you've got a car and you haven't got your driver's license, well, it's not very useful to you, right? Or if you've got a car, you know how to drive it, but you don't know what the road rules are, you're going to be in trouble as well. And that's the same thing with AI. You've got to have the toolkit to know how to use it properly, because it's a lot different to just a search engine, right? It's giving you a lot more interpretation, isn't it? And it's using, if it doesn't know, it's broadening that gap of knowledge. So you've got to be really specific with your prompt. Prompt engineering is really the skill of what we're doing now with AI. If we want to, rely on it as a tax agent, it's that, like I say to people, if you don't know how to write a good prompt, pick a topic that you're an expert in and write the prompt and see what comes back.
Yeah,
right? I do that all the time. If you just want to talk about, assessable income, ordinary income, or something really basic, put something in there and find out, is salary and wages ordinary income, and provide legislative references and give me a link. And see what comes up with. Because every single time I say, give me the link, give me the source document that you've made your interpretation from.
And that's a really good point, that going to the source, if it's kind of spitting out a suggested response and it's providing a link, you should certainly verify what it's saying comes from a document and check it. This is where the problem of hallucinations we see through the court documents, through, a lot of the media, the negative media spotlight that AI gets, is often because these hallucinations haven't been verified. If you're taking the steps to cross-check and expand and correct, and just use it as that, and like for a particular tool, not the replacement of the whole task, it probably would have been picked up and resolved.
Yeah, but pick up the link. I was slack once and wanted to do some statistics or something, and I said, "Give me a statistics with something to do with tax agents and tax, what percentage." And they gave me a number, and I said, "Where did that come from?" And they came back to me and said, "We made it up." Like thank you for being. They'll be honest if you ask them, okay? But it's very much. I always ask for the link, okay? And it was. I've been talking a lot about AML-CTF of late because it's topical, and we're trying to work out, whether we have to be registered if we just do tax returns. And I say, no, you don't, right? And then someone said to me, but I Googled it and it said you have to. So I went, okay, let's do it. So we just said, do you have to be registered for AML-CTF if you're doing tax returns? And it came up and said yes, but it gave me a link. And so I clicked on the link, and it was something from AUSTRAC. And you could tell what they did. There was nothing to mention tax returns in there. But if you ask, so what you do is you can ask them how they came. The beautiful thing about AI, it'll tell you what it's done. So then I said to AI, why did you mention tax returns when it's not mentioned in the document that you provided to me? And they basically said, accountant does tax returns, therefore tax returns are covered, because in this thing says accountants are covered by the new AML tranche 2. And I go, great, now I know that you're wrong. But it's that sort of conversation that you need to have. But the thing that I'm finding interesting, that I'm talking to people about, is not us using it, Lizzie. I know it's a bit extension on from what the TPB does, but what's happening now is the clients are coming back to us, like good old Google Doctor, when you go to the GP or whatever, they're coming and going, they've done someone's tax return, they've thrown it into ChatGPT, and then come back with, these are all the queries I've got. And we're going, that's not quite relevant. But what worries me is they thought it was appropriate to put their data up into ChatGPT.
Now all that information is
one of my big rules with being a tax agent, we cannot transmit electronically a tax file number. So who knows what they've put up into the cloud? I just worry about how free people are with their data. And so in that respect, is it our role as tax agents to explain to our clients that you shouldn't do that for privacy confidentiality reasons? And I think that broadens what we're trying to do here, or what the TPB is trying to do here. Because I love the idea that they're putting out these sort of documents to help, because they're on the front foot. But they're on the front foot saying, everyone's using it, let's just work it out. Right. And another example of ChatGPT to do with tax, someone said, well, if I buy an investment property, do I have to pay tax on it when I dispose of it? Right. They basically asked that into the prompt, and they came back. They go, according to section 42, you can get rollover relief. And I'm going, what? So the clients come back and said, yeah, it's of the Indian Tax Act. It's like, really, guys, ask the specific questions. That's all to do with prompt engineering.
So that obviously creates another element for tax practitioners, and that educative role for clients, and the extension of that Googling of answers issue. But it raises the issue of that storage of data. Even a tax practitioner, if you wanted to use those tools, would need to get permission from the client first to do that. But let's just say the client gave permission to put all of that information up into ChatGPT or another external or third-party Gen AI model. My question would be, should you ultimately be doing that, even if you got permission from the client? I think there's a big issue in even doing that anyway. That even if you've got that ability, unless it's within the four walls of the firm and very much a specified Gen AI model, you've there's a lot of issues of doing any of that, even contemplating doing any of that,
You're doing
even when
that
you
from a
do have.
privacy point of view, aren't you?
Yeah,
A
from a
privacy
privacy point of view, that the
confidentiality.
data goes into being trained. You don't know what use,
Yeah,
that becomes out, that
yeah.
is essentially public, and to have that level of knowledge becomes a little bit concerning. Even storage where that data is being stored,
Oh, absolutely. And that's the same with all the
yeah, yeah.
KYC and things like that we need to do, Lizzie, as well. And, when we look at AI and when we've looked at any of these tools that we use, we always like coming back to the known.
Mm,
And like, with the outsourcing of tax services, I always go back to our quantity surveyors or our R&D consultants,
mm.
right? Because they're special tax agents. But, even with you're talking about should you be using it for a client, think about the data that the ATO produce as well.
Mm, mm,
Private binding rulings.
mm,
You know, we've had conversations with the ATO and our various meetings with them where they go, oh, we don't sort of agree with that PBR anymore, sort of thing. And we go,
mm,
well, please take it away because people think that they can rely on it.
mm,
But then
mm,
can you really rely on it? And what I'm getting to is it's so heavily redacted for privacy
mm,
reasons that it's a bit of an idea, but you can't really rely on a private
mm.
binding ruling because you don't even know the proper facts
No,
because it's so
no.
heavily redacted. And
Yeah.
that's even where the ATO is giving us the information but redacting it. So if you're going to use AI in that way, how much heavily redacted do you need to be to keep the
Mm,
privacy and
yeah,
confidentiality?
yeah.
Right? You see what I'm getting at with that?
Mm,
Private
mm.
confidentiality, which means is it really meaningful?
And
Can
that's where it's
ChatGPT
you
really
as the
help?
expert that has to bridge that gap, because ultimately you need to be selective in that prompt engineering. You've got to be selective in the Gen AI tool you use to do that prompt engineering. But ultimately it's the person that should be the decision maker, the judgment holder, the arbiter here. You've got to put the dots together and make sense of that. And it ultimately comes down to you still have to be competent. You have to have the knowledge and skills. You have to take reasonable care not only to understand the client's position, their affairs. You have to take reasonable care to apply the law correctly. You need to keep appropriate records. And so if you're using AI, records should include that use of AI in that process, and show that essentially you've taken reasonable care. You haven't just relied on an output, that you've actually bridged it to an appropriate, reasonably care position to come to a point where you've provided
Absolutely.
certain advice.
And
And
that's where I
if
come
yeah.
down to it's like your grad. That's how I put it. I mean, I'm
Mm,
not being awful with calling it that, but it's basically someone that can do the research for you and be very pleasing and give you a document. And that's what AI can do fabulously, right? You don't want to interpret anything. You just want to go, you give me all the residency cases on outbound, domicile, domicile in Australia. Like you just ask them for a whole suite of cases from Australia and you tell them where to search as well.
mm, mm,
And you can
mm,
narrow your search down to just proper, case law publications and things like that. It's not,
mm,
Lucy wrote something in the Sun Pictorial, it's sort of
mm.
that's how it works.
Yeah, yeah. And ultimately it then leads to, yeah, that quality management system that needs to be in place, whether it's supervising the use of AI versus people. You still need all those elements. So we've got to ultimately look at if we look at what taking reasonable care is, that takes into account the nature and scope of what the tax agent services that are being provided, what has actually been done, what steps have actually been done using AI, then what steps have been taken to verify and ensure that's an appropriate outcome, and documenting all of that. To evidence the fact that you have done an appropriate
Absolutely.
job. And certainly that's what, as we said in the media, what we've been seeing, it's been that governance element that's fallen short, because it's not
Oh, of
necessarily that
course.
they've used AI, it's that they haven't checked. And so if they checked it, they would have realized that that case reference was a hallucination, or that statement was an hallucination. and ultimately it falls upon the practitioners here. It's essentially on them.
And that comes down to what the role of the TPB is. It's basically governance.
Mm.
It's up to us whether we use our professional judgment and we're capable of applying the tax law that way. But it's basically, what is the process? What's our governance? And it comes down to trust. And that's really what it's all that's what it's all about. It's trusting that we have done something that is, I hate to use the word correct, but it's appropriate, right? And it's fit for purpose, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. And we've just got to be mindful that there's going to be a point where efficiency becomes problem. We don't want to be over-reliant on AI. We want to have that balance. And obviously we can look back in time. At one point, Excel came into play. At one point, a calculator came into play. Technology evolves, and there's that period that, we do, we might have learnt in school how to do a lot of maths by hand and not requiring a calculator, but I certainly haven't done that kind of maths by hand in a long time because we have calculators, we have Excel. So we do have to appreciate there is efficiency here and that it can be a tool, but it's obviously that point where we've got to be mindful about the risks of when AI becomes a really problematic contribution and leads to more problems than what the value presents in itself. But with that is a changing nature of tax agent services too. If we see more automation, if we see a lot more development in what tax compliance looks like, we may ultimately see individual tax returns, the need for these reducing as well. So there's a lot of
that's
development.
The efficiency. That's the efficiency part of it. But I just worry about a lot of the plug and play when it comes to tax law as well, Lizzie, because we know that when we look at a case, it depends on the facts. No one single factor is determinative, blah, blah, blah. We say that all the time, right? So how do you actually plug and play it? How do you codify it when everyone's a little bit nuanced? And that worries me as well, even with things like tax planning. Like I go, the most efficient I am in doing a tax return is someone that I know. I've done their tax returns for, 10 years. I speak to them throughout the year, so I know any life-changing events that's happened. I know all that sort of thing. So I go, okay, now you've told me about this. Let's go through, and we're really efficient because I know how to target my questions. But, can AI really do that? Is it, can they actually, quantum computing or whatever, let's just look at it that way because it will get there most likely. But at the moment, it's not. Just see, even with things like the robots were really sort of couldn't do very, that sort of thing much, and now they can. So you can get to that sort of, you can get there, but at the moment I still think it's very, very, even though we call it AI, it's just following a set of rules and then making up the gaps. Really, that's what it's learning, the gaps.
And so for me, the biggest issue is about that transparency piece, in that we need to be more open with each other about how we're actually using it within that tax firm, for example, setting. The junior staff, the senior staff, they actually need to be talking with each other and being open about their usage. What is permitted? How is it permitted? That policy piece, because there are surveys out there that suggest that there is a lot of use that is inappropriate use through free public tools that are perceived to be problematic, that they're breaching IP, they're using it for purposes when they're claiming it to be their own work, they're uploading materials that they shouldn't be, sensitive information as well, contravening a multitude of policies and regulations there. And to what extent, if we're more open about it and talk it through with everyone and become clear on that governance, that quality management approach, to say, hey, look, this is a tool, but we need to be able to use it in a way that it provides that efficiency but doesn't breach or risk breaching our obligations and ethical practice there. Because I think we're going to start seeing at some point allegations coming through to the TPB of these breaches relating to problematic AI usage. I don't think we're seeing them yet, but I think there's, when we see allegations come through and outcomes of investigations and decisions, part of that piece is probably going to be increasingly inappropriate use of Gen AI tools.
Well, we're seeing it with case law at the moment, aren't we? So we are seeing the case law coming through saying that you've got, made up cases basically done from AI or whatever, or briefs being done by AI, and you couldn't cross-reference it because it was fictitious. So we are seeing it at that level. So there's no reason why we can't see that at the TPB level as well.
Yeah.
So if you see it at the TPB level, what are we going to see? I think the first tranche of that will be probably privacy and confidentiality breaches to begin with. I think that's where it is. If you look at various practitioners that are in trouble with the TPB, a lot of it is not being a fit and proper person, which means you haven't got your own tax affairs in place. It's one of those really basic Mickey Mouse type ones, which I can't believe no one, because someone can get pinged on that. Like, pay your tax on time and lodge all your requirements on time. That doesn't seem too difficult to me. But, actually providing, are we going to see, how long will it be till we see something like a practitioner providing AI advice to a client without saying it's from AI? I think that's where you're heading with what you're doing. And we're saying, is the problem we've used it? Is the problem we haven't disclosed it? And that's sort of, I think, where we're at the moment. Is it problematic that we use it? Because the Big Four are talking about using it for audits and things like that. And they're going to say, well, we're going to be more efficient, which means our fees should come down. That's what I reckon. That's what I'm hearing. I'm saying, well, therefore, your revenue should come down if you're going to be more efficient using AI for the big audits. But, if you're using it, to provide advice, I think, as I said, the first thing will be confidentiality and privacy breaches, and then it'll be non-disclosure, because we know from all the other guidance we get from I was about to say the ATO, the TPB, everything we get from the TPB is that we have to declare whether we outsource. If we're using a person that's been deregistered in the past and all that sort of stuff. Right. And I'm actually quite pleased because it's not part of this podcast, but there's also been more information about increasing the powers of the TPP and to unregistered agents, which I think is a big problem with it all. Because now what's happening is every taxpayer probably wants to be a tax agent. Every taxpayer wants to be able to do their own tax return. And they might be able to do that with AI, but should they? And have they got the skills to know whether it's right or wrong? And that's where we're coming down to. So it's still, the TPB guidance is still centered on us providing tax agent services and how we use it. But it's just as easy, as we've explored in our papers and things, is the end user, the taxpayer using it, and do they actually know how they're using it? You're not going to diagnose your own cancer, so why would you actually do your own tax return if it is complicated?
Yeah, and that comes down to the fact that a lot of what we've been speaking about is where there's a tax practitioner involved. So a client could be not a client and just a tax payer utilising the online My Tax Lodgement system. And so if they're relying on AI to do that, that obviously raises some concerns too for not only ensuring that there's consumer protection of what they're doing, but obviously for them being in a position to, to have taken the right steps to be accurate, and also the cost of that through, issues of privacy and even cybersecurity, depending on what they're putting into those machines there. So is there any
other penalties for recklessness, haven't you?
Yeah,
really?
yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's what we look at. One of the last cases that I was looking at as well is, someone uses a fin influencer, gets sucked in for their tax returns, and then they got into trouble, and they go, but a reasonable person would know that you were reckless because you should have known that that wasn't right, because you've been using a tax agent for 20 years or whatever. And now you find this old mate on Instagram or Facebook Messenger or something, and they go, oh, I can get you all this back. It's worked. And what happened? They couldn't remit the recklessness penalties. He was reckless. Yeah, and that's where it all comes down to. So it's that recklessness element. So, based on the ART decision, so the administrative tribunal and the cases that we're seeing come through at the moment, the laws are saying, well, if it is too good to be true, it probably is. So therefore, it's your responsibility. Don't be so gullible is really what's coming through. And that's still the messaging that's coming through with AI, I think, Lizzie.
Yeah, totally. So are there any final thoughts on the topic of AI and tax agent services?
Yeah, look, I think the big thing with it for me is very much making sure your prompt is very specific. Okay, make sure, and I think that's what it is. Don't, it's a measure twice, cut once type prompt. Put a really good effort into your prompt. It shouldn't be just a sentence. It should be a few sentences. And I think that's to try and get the most specific bit of information out that you can, and don't use it for your professional judgment. Use it for your research. That's how I use it. I use it to find things for me efficiently.
But when you're doing that prompt, be specific, but not disclose the sensitive information.
Correct. No, I mean specific in terms of what you're trying to find, because I'm looking at it from a research point of view. No, absolutely not. I do not put, Lizzie wants to deduct her computer. Let's find out what's going on, sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
What about you, Lizzie? What do you think? What's your take-home message from this AI? You would have been pleased to see it come out of the TPB as well.
I think it's a good start. There's not a huge amount of information in there, and I think a lot of it, if you've been thinking about that space, you're probably going to see nothing overly new or novel. But if you haven't turned your mind to these issues, that's when the problems are going to arise. And so don't be that assuming person or just, disregarding it and just playing with it. You do actually need to turn your mind to your usage. Every time you use it, contemplate how you're using it and is it ethical. I think just having that ethical mindset on every time you use it and thinking through what the purpose of this is, what are you gaining out of it, and I think you will be in a much better place in contemplating what the system you're using is, what you're doing, what you're seeking to achieve. And as you said, good prompt in the mix there as well, I think is really
your governance
important.
Principles always. Sounds good.
And otherwise, keep make use of the TPB guidance that's up there. They've got a lot of detail, a lot of educational information to support practitioners. So make use of that. There's a lot of information out there, but also look to the actual legislation, the actual regulation. Make sure you read that as well, because ultimately that's what you're needing to abide by. So with that, that's it for this episode of Taxed and Confused, where the rules are rigid, the paperwork is endless, and the burden of proof is all yours. If you enjoyed today's deep dive into tax admin, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's just as confused as we are. And remember, this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. It's not tax advice, and we're not your tax agents. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious, stay compliant, and stay just a little bit taxed and confused.